So the few tricks to making your scene look like it's on paper is kind of making the render look like it's papery. And the easiest way to do that, or like hand drawn, I guess is what I'm trying to say. The easiest way to do that is to turn on this freestyle, turn that freestyle checkbox on within your render settings. And I'm just going to turn my sampling down just so our renders can be kind of quick. And let's just see what it looks like just by turning that freestyle on. We like automatically get this outline. But to make it like squiggly, if you go into your render layers and you scroll down to freestyle or freestyle line style, you can add a lot of things. You can change the color of the stroke, the transparency, the thickness, but you can also change kind of the geometry and give it a modifier. And I like this spatial noise modifier. So now if I render it, it'll like bubble up in places. So I mean, that's really cool and sketchy. If I were to render a different frame, so I'm just gonna key back a frame. I'm gonna go to slot 2. This is kind of how I test what the motion will look like. So I have a slot 1 and slot 2, and if I just hit the number keys at the top of the keyboard, 1 and 2, if I toggle back and forth really quick, I kind of get a sense of like how much movement that is. And to me, that's like, for at least that project I was working on, it was like too much. So then I just start tweaking these settings. So I'll go to slot 1. I'll turn the amplitude down, which I think means like the height, and the scale, which means like the size of the curve. So maybe I'll like give it a scale of 5 and an amplitude of like 2. Go to slot 1, render. And then I'll go to slot 2 and key forward 1 frame just with the arrow key. So now I'm on frame 63. Because if I re-rendered the same frame, it would give me the same noise pattern. So now let's just look at his head. So yeah, I would say just for this example, like that's good enough. Now we need to make like this world part transparent. So that's easy. You just go to film. In the render settings, film, you click transparent, and then you get something like this. Okay, so that is the main step. You want to give like your thing an outline, and then I think the color is nice. You know, there's kind of a clear shadow. So then you would go into your compositor node editor, and instead of doing materials, you do the compositing and use nodes. And so we have our render layer right here, and we basically want to put this. I'm going to click backdrop. And if I do Control-Shift-Click, this viewer node pops up, so I can kind of see what I'm looking at. Also, whatever's going into your viewer node, if you want to export it as your final image, it also has to be going into this composite. So like, even though you can see this in the viewer node, this is what actually gets exported. So what I like to do is hold Shift and drag to make this little node, and then I just drag them into both. So now whatever's leaving this line will get fed into both. So now I need like a paper texture, which I had. It was nice because the kids were holding a sheet of paper, so the video was actually like the background image I put. But for this example, I'm going to put just a picture of paper, and so now we have like a paper texture, and maybe I should. I'm going to distort it with a transform node and rotate it by 90. So this is kind of node-based compositing. It's kind of different than what you're used to if you use Premiere. And then to overlay them on top of each other, you can't just stack layers in this node-based format. You have to add a color alpha over. So let's see if we just throw this. Oh, okay, so we're getting this kind of effect now. So actually what I did in that effect to make it like kind of blend was I did a blending mode kind of like you would in Photoshop. So instead of an alpha over, I'm just going to plug this back into here. I believe I used a color mix. So just by default, it kind of mixes between the two. And I think if I turn this checkbox on, it'll say use the alpha. So now I'm mixing, but instead of just mixing one on top of the other, if you do something like multiply, you start to see lines through it. If you turn that down, you start getting a certain effect. I think the easiest way to like kind of scroll through what your look is going to be is if you hold Control and just middle mouse wheel through these choices. You start to see all the different options. So I may have done like darken. It's hard to say. This person is such a dark color that when you multiply it, it's going to kind of cancel out. So maybe, you know, lightening him up might give us a different effect. And then making this, if I make this material, this ground texture, what's called a holdout, it means it's going to be transparent, but the freestyle render doesn't actually know that I want to make that transparent, so it'll still trace that like kind of horizon line back there. So let's see how this looks. So now we have like a horizon line traced. We have these boxes. You can see the paper through it. And that's frame 63. Let's go to slot 1 and go to frame 62 and render. So now I have like this kind of cartoony type thing overlaid onto a paper background. So